Right. Well, good evening, everyone out there listening. We are obviously very, very green to this, and we're very excited to welcome you all to our show tonight, to a North Queensland State podcast. My name is Patrick McLaughlin. I'm the host of this evening's today's show. David is expecting a child, and or his wife is, and offering her support. So he's got a leave pass tonight, and he's throwing us in the deep end. And we're soon to be joined by our guest tonight, David Landini. We're just working through some technical issues in the background, and we hope to have the results shortly. So I'm just chatting with Bill Bates now. We're just talking about the whole new state movement, and we're just sort of, I guess, kicking the ball around, discussing, where borders should be, some insight as to what's coming up in the future. And, yes, good evening. Hello, is that you?
G'day, Pat. 27 Fingers is David, and I'm just connecting him through now. David, can you hear me?
Yes.
David, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you,
David, I'll
Andrew.
just introduce you to Pat and Bill Bates, and I'll let them take it away from here. Thanks, Patrick.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Yep, I've got that. Good evening, David. Welcome.
Hello, Patrick. It's great to talk to you. It's great to be on air.
It's been a bumpy ride in, I believe, and we're delighted.
It has been, yes.
It seems I don't have any luck with IT, and I'm really so happy that there's other people out in this world who are struggling through some IT issues as much as I do. And I'm lucky my wife is very IT savvy, so we're very fortunate to have in the background Andrew Cummins there. Andrew, thank you so much for sorting that out for us tonight and being in the background pressing buttons. These podcasts are only made doable by people like Andrew in the background. So welcome, David. How are you, mate? How are you tonight?
And Patrick, look, I'd just like to say Andrew did a great job.
Good.
Andrew Cummins, he did a great job, and I thoroughly recommend him to anybody that wants to know about technical issues to do with telephones.
Good on you, Andrew. Well done, mate. Yeah. Good job. David, welcome. Now, David is our guest tonight for all the listeners out there. And if I may, David, I'll just give a small introduction to anyone out there listening to us. And that David is from the great state of New South Wales, down south there, and residing down in the Riverina area. What's the township?
That's right.
Whereabouts you from exactly, David?
Well, I actually live in a small town called Warcool. It's a very small town in southern New South Wales, or the Riverina. I don't expect a lot of people have heard of it, but it's just north of Echuca, about an hour's drive north of Echuca, which is just on the border in Victoria, and sort of in between Deniliquin and Swan Hill. So that's the area. We're 36 kilometres from the Victorian border, the Murray River. Yeah, beautiful part of the world, beautiful.
Nice one. And tell me this, is winter finished down there at this stage, David, or is it still quite chilly at night?
No, pretty well finished, Patrick. Yeah. We have good winters here, but they're not. We're heading into spring, summer. Spring's a funny time of the year. It can be either winter or summer. At the moment, we're back in winter. But it will warm up. It gradually warms up until we get summer. So our summers are very hot. We normally get a week of 40 to 45 degrees, that's hot. Queensland gets hotter, I suppose, or Queensland has its own heat, but it certainly does get hot here. But in winter we have a nice cool to cold climate, or cool, which is really very, very nice. Very flat here as well. It's really, we're in a floodplain here. It's called the Riverina. Because it's actually a large floodplain, and there are a lot of rivers that flow through here. The Murray's the largest one, of course, and then you've got the Murrumbidgee, which is north of here, and then you've got the Darling, which is north again. But it's over the millions of years, there has been a lot of flood activity, and there's a lot of clay surface clay ground, which is silt from floods.
Yep.
And it's got a particular silt,
isn't it?
I beg your pardon?
terrific for farming, having lots of clay and silts around.
It's great. Great irrigation. It's a great irrigation country. It's a natural floodplain. And what the early settlers and our forefathers did, which is so great about this area, they by gravitation they put in a canal system and basically divert water out of the rivers, the Murray River, the Murrumbidgee River, and so forth, and flood it over the natural floodplain and grow rice, cotton, pastures, you name it, whatever you need or whatever you want to grow with water, you can grow it here. It's really good. They have a really good climate as well. Like the summers are very warm and it's great for rice. A lot of people might think rice is not an Australian crop, but we actually grow a lot of rice here in a normal year we do. It's a huge industry in this area. And also cotton, that's another big crop. Not so much in my area, slightly to the north. But most of it's done by flood irrigation, which is very cheap. You know, it's not, you don't pump water, you just divert it out of the river back into the natural floodplain, and it just sits there. It doesn't soak away. The clay silt is a good
retainer.
It holds the water. Retains the water, and it grows. It's very, very, very productive area with the water, with the irrigation and so forth. Under natural conditions, it's a semi-desert in natural conditions and very, very tough country. There's no doubt about it. It's very difficult country without irrigation, but with irrigation, it's beautiful, fantastic, very productive country.
David, now you work in the wool industry. You run a family business, and tell me a bit about that. So you buy wool from the farmers, from the cattlemen out there, or the farmers in the regions, and then you'll take it down to the markets to sell down the market. Is that correct?
Yeah. They can. Wool growers consign their wool. They consign their wool clip to me, and then I prepare it for sale. This is in Melbourne. I live in southern New South Wales, but the wool's delivered into Melbourne, the bales, and it's prepared for sale there, warehoused there, and sold at the Melbourne wool sales. So it's a bit of an unusual, it's sort of a remote controlled system, but it works really well. A couple of things about that. In fact, all the produce in southern New South Wales, even though we're in New South Wales, it doesn't go it's not exported via Sydney, it's all exported via Melbourne, which is a little bit unusual. We're actually, in this area here, we're actually much more Victorian orientated than orientated towards New South Wales. All our commerce is with Victoria and all our export is via Melbourne. And most of the early settlers actually came up through Victoria. It's never, like commercially, culturally and personally, this area has never really been part of New South Wales, to be quite frank. I don't want to upset any people in Sydney and that sort of thing, but it's always been much more Victorian orientated than New South Wales. New South Wales proper doesn't really start, culturally New South Wales doesn't really start till around Wagga, but south of Wagga, and even Wagga itself and south of Wagga, is really much more Victorian orientated.
Wow, and, so interesting.
So that's the first. Yeah, that's one point I wanted to make. But if you look at like northern New South Wales is an unusual state. Patrick and I, we discussed the New England New State effort back in the 1930s to the 1960s earlier. But I think like New England, that's also, I believe it's actually more orientated toward Brisbane than Sydney. It's certainly a lot closer to Brisbane than Sydney. And it wouldn't surprise me if it actually is. And I think that's why, now I might be just stepping a bit out of my bounds a little bit here, but I think New England were quite happy to separate from New South Wales because they're actually much more orientated toward Brisbane anyway. And I know that the North Queensland people want to separate from Brisbane, but New South Wales is an unusual state. And if you go to the west of the state, you've got Broken Hill, for example. Now, Broken Hill and the west of New South Wales is much more orientated towards South Australia than Sydney. So much that Broken Hill is actually on South Australian time. They're half an hour behind us. all their commerce and business goes through South Australia to Adelaide, and and you can always tell, you can tell where their orientation is. I mean, by the newspapers that they read, and they actually read their local paper is the Adelaide Advertiser, which is of course the Adelaide newspaper. Yeah, so I mean, you got New South. Oh yeah. The rest of the state's more South Australian orientated. The south of New South Wales is more Victorian orientated. Like where I am, for example, it's a 3.5 hour drive to Melbourne, and it's an 8 hour drive at least to Sydney.
Right.
You know, we're much closer to Melbourne than we are to Sydney, and that's why all the commerce goes, all our export commerce goes through Melbourne, because we're just much closer.
Well, just to bring people up to speed a bit more. Sorry if I may, David. Look, just to bring some of the listeners back up to speed here. So I was fascinated today. I had a great chat with David, and David, as he's been talking about, he is from the Riverina region of New South Wales. And as many of our listeners will appreciate, we our site here, yes, to North Queensland State, we've been working on this process, to get the process moving to work towards statehood for the north of Australia. And I was absolutely gobsmacked to chat with David today to find out that, you know, these other regions, and I'm well aware of the New England region are having a referendum, as we've just discussed, but I was absolutely surprised to hear that other regions like the Riviera also are feeling like they are not represented, and that their representation is actually falling each time of election. There's almost another seat that's been taken from the regions and the bush and being given to the cities as the population in those areas continues to grow and explode. So tell me a bit about that, David. What's been going on with you folk, and what have you guys been up to in relation to working towards that in your area down there, David?
Well, what's happened, Patrick, and look, a lot of people don't realise this, but electorates in New South Wales, and I believe Queensland is the same, but they're based on population, and each electorate has to have equal population within 5% of the average. New South Wales has 93 electorates in the Legislative Assembly, which is the lower house. Now, and what's happened since 1904, 1904 was the first election in New South Wales after the Federation of Australia. Now, back in 1904, there was roughly about half the electorates were in the country areas and half the electorates were in the area of Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. But because they're based on equal population, and because the population growth has been quicker more in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong, what's happened now is, on average, every 5 years, one electorate has disappeared out of the country and basically reappeared in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. So much so that back in 1904, there used to be about a mix of half and half country, half city. Now it's 76% Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong, and only 24% in the country areas. And it's even worse than that, because there's not a total of 93 electorates, 72 in Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong, and 21 in the rest of the state. But there's another 15 of those electorates that are up and down the coast. And on the whole west of the Great Dividing Range, there's actually only 8 electorates and only 8 members of Parliament. And we've actually got one seat named Barwon, which is Burke and I think Broken Hill's in there as well. But Barwon is one electorate, and back in 1904, there used to be 7 electorates there and 7 members of Parliament from that area. But because the electorates have drifted into the city, there's only one there now. There's only one electorate, one member of Parliament for 47% of the whole state of New South Wales. Now, that is not represent. It's nearly unbelievable, but that's you look at the electoral maps and that's what it is. The seat that I'm in, Murray, we're south of Barwon, but Murray takes up 13% of the area of the state. But all the irrigation and all the flood irrigation, and I hope we can talk about that a little bit later, because water is a huge issue here, and it's one of the reasons we have to leave New South Wales.
But
you've got Barwon. Yeah, Barwon and Murray, they take up 60% of the area of New South Wales. And all the flood irrigation in New South Wales is in those two electorates. So the problem we've got is that at the moment there's only two members of parliament in a 93 member legislative assembly, and practically we effectively have no representation in parliament simply because we don't have the numbers to make any difference in the New South Wales Parliament. And I can assure you Queensland has exactly the same problem, and I know South Australia has. And if you look at it, and I believe, Patrick, you and I discussed this and you mentioned that it looked like there would be another 3 or 4 electorates and members of parliament disappear out of the country and go into Brisbane at the next state election or the one after this next one. Yeah. And that's the problem we have in New South Wales. And like, for example, there's only 8 electorates in New South Wales west of the Great Dividing Range as it is. That's 8 members of parliament in the Legislative Assembly, because we have an upper house and a lower house, or New South Wales does. But if we continue to lose one electorate and one member of parliament every 5 years, in 40 years' time, there's 8 electorates, 8 times 5 is 40 years. In 40 years' time, we'll have about 1 member of parliament for the whole area west of the Great Dividing Range, which is probably 90% of the area of the state.
Unbelievable. Now listen, you're right. Now, if I may, David, just jump in there. Yeah. So what we mentioned to David earlier, just to bring the listeners up to speed, was in Queensland, there's 93 MPs in the state of Queensland, and 73 of those MPs also reside within 250k of the great city of Brisbane. So we have very much diminishing representation in the regional areas as well, David. So we're hearing what you're saying there. So please continue.
Yes, it's exactly the same problem, Patrick. Having electorates based on equal population, and because the population growth is mainly in the city, and the growth is mainly in the city, not because they're great at any particular thing, it's because all the public money gets sucked into that city, and that's what's happened in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. The public money gets put in there with you name it, any public infrastructure like hospitals or universities and this sort of stuff. You get massive amounts of those built in that area, and they create their own employment, and you don't see that infrastructure built in the country because it's in the city, and that creates its own population growth, and that's why, and because that population growth increases there, and we're limited to 93 members of parliament, like that's the number. That's why we've lost one, like I said, one electorate, one member of parliament every 5 years, and we already have a lot of problems. We have, I think, insurmountable problems with New South Wales as it is, and the water issue is a huge issue. But we've got a lot of people here that think that they think that politics and politicians are there for everybody. But they're not really. Politicians are actually there for their electorate, and they do whatever they can for their electorate to help and benefit their electorate. I
guess where you're going there is when you've got the votes stacked. When you've got the votes stacked in a corner, they are doing the right thing by the electorate. But the problem is, that's the loudest voice then is that electorate, which tends up to be the grouping in these big cities.
That's right.
And then the voice of the regions is getting softer and softer, and you know.
Exactly.
I can tell a very quick story. We have our local MP up here is Michael Healy. You know, I think personally Michael's done a not a bad job up in North Queensland, but in the city of Cairns, but. You know, he goes down to Brisbane and he'll say, I can come back with some crumbs off the table. We're supplying a lion's share of revenue from the north of Australia in as far as the minerals and incomes for the state government, and by way of all those royalties that the government take from minerals and that sort of thing. And and I feel it's why are you coming back with crumbs when we deserve a slice of the cake? You right now. I mean, how's the Riviera fare down there, David? Is it producing
Riverina
rules of revenues for the state?
Oh, yeah, Riverina. Look, very interesting, Patrick. One of our members did some research, and there's a website that he was aware of, and it's called RemPlan, but it has on there all sorts of different records and so forth, but it's got the wealth produced in any particular region in Australia. And he did this research, and he added up the wealth produced in the Riverina, and the Riverina is what I call the Riverina is the 8 electorates west of the Great Dividing Range. But the annual wealth of the Riverina is $83.9 billion per annum. And, that's a big number, and probably
that's a big number.
Really, just to explain how relevant that is, the wealth production of Tasmania is only $64.7 billion. So the Riverina as it is, and this is with the poor governance from New South Wales who are taking the water out of the area and all these other things that aren't good for the people here. But it's already $20 billion richer than Tasmania. Yeah. So it's a very wealth producing area. It's not as wealthy as Sydney. There's no issue, no doubt about that. I mean, Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong does produce the most wealth in the state, but the Riverina is a very wealthy area. It can be a very, very wealthy area. It's certainly wealthier than Tasmania, certainly, and also wealthier than the ACT, Australian Capital Territory. Their annual wealth production is $73.1 billion, and the Northern Territory is $54.8 billion. So the Riverina is wealthier, produces more wealth than Tasmania and the ACT and the Northern Territory. So it's a great area. Yeah.
Sure, Bill, go ahead.
I've got to laugh at that concept that the ACT produces wealth. I mean...
yeah, you're right, yes. I laugh with you too, Bill. I've got to laugh with that too, yeah.
I understand how they work out gross state revenue or gross state product, and it's basically the wages earned. But when you come to it, the wage earnings in the ATC is taxpayers' money from people like you and me and everyone in the private industry. There is no wealth creation in the ATC. It just happens that they get well paid, and their wages, their public wages, add up to that horrible amounts of money that we're paying in government administration.
Quite right, Bill. The wealth they produce is only what they take off us. Exactly right.
Unbelievable. Now, David, do you want to talk about, before we talk about water, I know that's a very big passion of yours, and it's almost worthy of its own show. But let's just go back a step now. I hear that you now are dabbling into, you've had a dabble in politics in the past, is that right? Or
that's right, yes,
the ring? Yep. What's your latest venture there, David? What are you currently working on there?
Well, look, just a little bit of background. I was a member of the National Party in the New South Wales, and that was a real education in politics. And when I say education, it was a disappointment, to be quite frank. I thought politics was sort of there for our benefit, but it's not really, unfortunately, and that's a bit disappointing to know that, but it is a fact. So there were a few things there that led me to conclude that there's more to politics than what may appear to be on the surface, and then from there I started to look into the numbers in New South Wales. I already knew that there was a lot of bad decisions that come out of the New South Wales government that were really bad for this area, particularly with water, and really with a lot of the timber industry as well, and basically in natural resource-based industries. So, and I've heard and I'll just go back another half step, but I've heard the old joke. There's no old joke that in New South Wales is often referred to as the initials are NSW, but actually the NSW stands for Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. And that's a bit of an old joke, but in actual fact it's true. You might as well have it that it does actually stand for Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. So I actually got a pen out one day in my bit of spare time, and I just do these things, and I had a look around, and I just isolated or drew a line around the electorates in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. And that's where I realised when you do that, you look at that, you think, mate, this is terrible. There's a huge concentration of electorates and politicians and political power in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. And in fact, out of the 93, I think it was 71 or 72 that are in that electorate, but it's 76% of the electorates in New South Wales. So I thought, wow, that's not good. Not necessarily bad, but it's a concern.
Yeah, just breaking up a bit there, David. I'll just chat for a second while hopefully the signal improves. But
I went further into it, and I looked at the last state election in New South Wales, and I added up the number. Oh, sorry.
So keep going, David. Keep going. Keep going, David. Can you hear me, David?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit there, David. You just your signal's dropping in and out. So if you can sort of look at that on your phone and see whether you can address that somehow or some means quickly, that'd be awesome. Because we're enjoying all the things you're covering there. Are you still there, David?
I am. I can hear you clearly.
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, keep going now, David. Keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
You can hear me. Okay. Look, sorry, yeah. I don't know what happened there. Okay. But I looked into the 2019 state election, and not only is there a huge concentration of electorates in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong, and if you look at, as you've already pointed out, Patrick, Queensland is very much the same, if not exactly the same. But it's even worse than that, of course, in that we lose one electorate one member of parliament every 5 years and so forth. But I looked at the breakdown of where people vote, for example, and, for example, the political party called the Greens, they got, I think it was around about 10% of the vote in New South Wales in the 2019 state election. But I added up the total number of voters who vote for the Greens, and I'll tell you why I quote the Greens, because that is rather important. But there was 435,400 people voted number one for the Greens in the last state election. Now, the west of the Great Dividing Range in the 8 electorates there's only a total of 398,000 voters west of the Great Dividing Range. Mm-hmm. So there's more people who vote for the Greens in New South Wales than there are the total number of voters, Labor, Liberal, National Party, whatever party you want to name, than there are west of the Great Dividing Range. And then it really made me realise that, hang on, the reason we're having the water taken out of this area, and that's what's happening, and the reason the timber industry has been shut down, and the reason there's restriction after restriction placed on all natural resource-based industries is not because of there's no water or and politics is numbers, and the numbers indicate, or the numbers show clearly why this is happening. Because for example, there's more green, like I said, there's more green voters now in New South Wales than there are voters west of the Great Dividing Range. Now the Greens oppose taking water out of the Murray River, Murrumbidgee River, or any of those rivers and using it for irrigation. Their opinion is that no, you just don't touch these things. They've got their own entity sort of thing. You just can't touch them, and that's why the farmers in this area are being deprived of water. And just for example, I was at a meeting only 2 weeks ago, and the chairman of Southern Riverina Irrigators, Chris Brooks, very knowledgeable man, very smart man, he pointed out that at the time the irrigators were on 11% allocation. Their full allocation is 100%, of course, and at the moment they're on 11%. And he pointed out that 11% accounts for 3% of the water currently in storage in Hume Weir and Dartmouth. So that's where all our waters are stored, but the New South Wales government has allocated 3% of that water to the irrigators in Murray Irrigation. Now, that's a pathetically low number. That's terrible. And New South Wales,
David, the scary part seems to be then. So you've got people who really are ignorant into the needs of the regions, and they're all in their latte shops and bars and restaurants in these big cities, dictating policy to the regions, and the regions, are really they're getting screwed over, and we see it up here too. Our farmers up here have been, absolutely punished over, over global warming issues and runoff issues that have been, before we had, which have been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, but suddenly it's the farmer, in Innisfail's fault that it's all, that's going, and they've worked out that, the latest sort of, I guess, investigations into all that have absolutely, wiped the floor with it as complete nonsense, in that event, but policies being laid by these people in the cities who really don't understand, or they have an agenda which is, it's fluffy and nice, but it's not real. It's not honest. It's full of, incorrect information and data that's been, that's been manipulated by medias and things like that to serve, other vested interests, So it sounds to me like you're in exactly the same ballgame as us, David.
Well, the thing is, Patrick, the Riverina is a very agricultural area. Agriculture is the backbone, well and truly, of the Riverina. There are a few other things, but agriculture is the big thing. And because you've got, as you said there before, that most of the members of Parliament are not in the agricultural areas; they're in the metropolitan areas. And I think to say that they don't know or don't care, I think that's actually a bit too kind for them. I think they actually do know, because the farmers and so forth, they have a lot of agricultural organisations, and they make really good presentations to all the politicians in New South Wales. So they do actually know, but politics is politics, and when you look at the numbers, and politics is numbers. And if you look at the numbers in New South Wales and the fact that there's more Green voters who are opposed to pretty well all agricultural practices than there are the total number of voters west of the Great Dividing Range, and the fact that politicians, to be elected, if they want to be elected, they have to appeal to the voters. They have to get the most votes. And politicians, they look and say, well, where are the votes? And when you look at where the votes are and the numbers, and you look at the fact that there's a very green environmental type orientation in New South Wales, particularly in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong, and I don't blame them either. I mean, basically they've wrecked their own environment, so I shouldn't say they've wrecked it, but they live in a very densely populated area, and I can see that they don't want, very, very urban. So I can see that they may think, gee, we've got to preserve our natural environment and so forth, but they make decisions that don't affect them, don't cost them any money, or don't deprive them of their livelihood by, for example, allocating 3% of the total amount of water that's currently in storage to irrigation. I mean, these dams, for example, Hume and Dartmouth, Hume's just east of Albury, it's a huge dam, and Dartmouth's in Victoria, upstream of Hume, and that's a huge storage area. These dams were built for irrigation. That's the only reason they were built. They weren't built there to regulate the water so they can run it out to sea. No, they were built for irrigation. So when you've got all this massive infrastructure that's been built there, and you only allocate 3% of the water that's in there, currently in there, to irrigation, and that's an act of the New South Wales government, the people around here, and this is not only an agricultural area, it's a very irrigation orientated agricultural area. What we have to realise is these people aren't on our side. Yeah. They're not on our side. If that's the best they can do, and a lot of us are self-employed and so forth. If somebody comes back and produces 3% of their potential, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. So I've concluded that these people actually are on our side. And when you look at the numbers and the politics and so forth, and the super domination of that area, and the green and the environmental influence in that area, it just all makes sense. But then I started to look and say, well, how can we get a solution out of this? How can we keep the water, for example, and maintain our livelihoods in New South Wales? And I've concluded that we can't. You can't. It doesn't matter who we elect for Parliament. you can elect anyone you like. It doesn't matter. They can go there, they can say whatever they want to say, they can do whatever they want to do. But when it comes to a vote, there's one vote in 93. We simply do not have the numbers to make any difference at all. And unfortunately, the people in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong, with that large Green influence, they do have the numbers. Like, for example, I think the Green, now, and I know I'm picking on the Greens a lot, but only because, well, I shouldn't say picking on the Greens, but I do quote the Greens a lot because they are opposed to pretty well all agricultural practices. But there's more, I think the Greens won outright 3 seats in the New South Wales Parliament in the last state election. Yeah, there's quite a significant Green representation actually in the Parliament. So
David, tell me, David. So moving on, I mean, we were talking today. So you formed a new party, is that correct? You formed the Riverina
in the process of it.
Okay.
Yeah. I've looked at it, and as far as achieving a new state, a Riverina state, there's sort of, you've got to wonder, well, how do you go about that? And I'll just go back, another half a step. As we know, Patrick, or you and I know, the only requirement to form a new state is to have the consent of the Parliament of the existing state.
Yep.
So for the Riverina to be formed into a state only requires the consent of the Parliament of New South Wales.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a case of, well, how do we achieve the consent of the Parliament of New South Wales? And of course, I've looked at the New England effort, and I thought everything the New England effort did was right.
Yeah.
Except, as we know, Patrick and I, we discussed this earlier, the only thing they did wrong was allow Newcastle to be included in the referendum on whether to form a new state. And because they let Newcastle participate in the referendum, they lost. Other than that, they were up around 60 to 70% yes vote, like form a New England state.
Yep.
So we have to have the objective, the ultimate objective is to form another state, and the step before that is to get the consent of the Parliament of New South Wales, and the step before that is to have a referendum, a state-sanctioned referendum, the same as New England, but we certainly won't have a Newcastle in that referendum. It'll only be the people within the Riverina. So it becomes a case, well, how do you get a referendum up? And you can, and that's got its own difficulties, and you can sort of go and ask your members of Parliament to, let's have a referendum and so forth. But what I thought would be the most effective way to get parliamentarians to agree to that is to form a political party, and the name of the party will be, it's in the formation at the moment, but it certainly will be formed, and the name of that party will be the Riverina State. So if we're not already a state by the time we come to the next election, there's a federal election, I think, in a year and a half, and there'll be a New South Wales state election in the year after that. So the idea of a political party, it will give some concrete formation. It'll make the organisation a bit more formal, but it'll also be very, very. This is the way I look at it. This will really put the issue out in the public domain. Yep. To have a party dedicated to the formation of a Riverina state, and when we come to an election and there's a vote, and people will have the opportunity to, on the electoral ballot, there will be candidates and so forth, and some of them will have the Liberal Party behind their name, some will have the Labor Party, some will have the National Party, and there'll be one there with the Riverina State behind their name. And that name will state exactly what that party's on about. And say, for example, we get 10% of the vote, and I really think we would get at least 10% of the vote, and maybe 20% of the vote. That will be a concrete number for everyone in Australia to see and recognise that, whoa, this issue is an important issue. There's at least, whatever number we get, it'll put a concrete number on the desire for this state. And I'm very confident we'll get a big number. So,
David, I'll tell you what,
we might get
David, all I can say is I hope you get more than the Greens. You there, David?
Well, I tell you, we probably can't, because Patrick, I hate to say it, because there's already 435,000. There's 435,400 Green voters in New South Wales already. We've only got a total of 398,000 voters in the area that I call the Riverina. So we won't get more than the Greens over the whole state. In the Riverina we will, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, the Greens get it. I do hate to say this though. The Greens get about 3 to 4% of the vote in the country areas, which to me is very disappointing because I just consider them our ideological opponent.
Yeah.
And they wanted to private us about our livelihoods and so forth. But if we get a concrete number, there's a few things to do with politics. You might get a member of parliament elected in parliament, that's great, but you don't have to, if politicians, Patrick and we discussed earlier, politicians will, the idea is to, if we can't actually get a member of parliament elected, to have other members of parliament or prospective members of parliament realise that this is a big issue, and if they campaign on it and add that to their policies of their own party, I think we'll have a lot of people who will support the formation of the state if we can prove that there is a concrete number here. So the formation of the political party I really think I'm certain will accelerate the issue, and the new state will be formed. Absolutely, will be formed. I've got no doubt about it. And this political party will accelerate the process by the fact that it puts it out in the public domain and it puts a concrete number on it.
David, if I may jump in there.
That's the reason for that.
David, if I may jump in there. So, look, that's very interesting. And, we had a great chat today, David and I, and for those who may have just joined on board, I'm talking with David Landini here, who's from the Riverina part of New South Wales, about the separate states and both New South Wales and North Queensland. And, part of the discussion we've had is that, if one of us groups can get some momentum into this and we can really get a firm message out and about, I'm sure there'll be other groups that will put their hand up and say, hey, we're not getting representation as well. So I was fascinated when we had our chat today to appreciate that you have so many similar issues that you're facing and having, which seem to be reflected in different parts of the country, all due to the same issue of that lack of representation, or the dilution of representation from the regions is having, and the effect it's having onto the people in those regions. And centralisation doesn't help it. We're a big believer of decentralising in North Queensland, so there's no need to have government offices side by side now. We can talk quite well on the internet and phones and zoom in on each other and have these discussions without shirt fronting somebody about some sort of issue, which is interesting. So well, that's great, David. So what else have you got for us tonight, David? Anything else you want to discuss before we finish and wrap up tonight's meeting with you there, mate?
Yeah. Look, the problem the concentration of electorates in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong is not necessarily a problem, but in practice it actually is a problem. And the big issue, of course, is water. That's a huge issue, which I did touch on that before. But the water has been a problem, as in there's been restriction after restriction and less water available as years go by. But that will, and that's what sort of brought this on at the moment, but this industry will be shut down. There's no doubt about it. It will be shut down, and there's reasons why it is shut down. It will be shut down, and that's the concentration of electorates in New South Wales, but also that environmental and green orientated attitude in that area, where they make decisions that don't affect them. They sound good and feel good, but don't affect them at all. But they have a massive effect out here, and are very, very bad for us. And just for example, I hope this is on topic, but like New South Wales, as I said, they've allocated 3% of the total amount of water in Hume Dartmouth to Murray irrigation. That's this area here. It's a huge irrigation area. But at that same time, you've got water goes down the Murray River into South Australia. Now, the Murray River flows into Lake Alexandrina, which then flows into the sea. Now, while irrigators here are on 11%, or they're on 17% now, but at that time, when Chris Brooks made that statement, they were on 11%. But at that same time, there was water flowing out to sea from the Murray River in South Australia at a huge, I don't know the exact quantity of water, but there are 11 gates open in the barrage. Now, I don't expect you to know what they are, but that's the outlet into the sea. So at the same time, there's basically very, very little water available for agriculture here. The powers that be are letting water just flow out to sea in South Australia in huge amounts of it. And I just think that, wow, that's not, I just can't accept that. And I can't accept that New South Wales, the government in charge of that, can allow that to happen. And unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident. It's a long-term problem. And when you look at the numbers in New South Wales, and if you look at the numbers in Queensland as well, you have exactly the same problem. The concentration of electorates in those metropolitan areas. We cannot surmount those problems. We're in a democracy. The majority rules, and we're not even near a majority. They are a super majority, and we are a super minority. So democratically, we cannot make a difference. So we can either say, okay, we will let you dry us up, and we will let you just let us blow away. We can say that, and that's what will happen. Or I've just concluded, and I've come to the conclusion, look, we cannot exist in New South Wales. We have to separate politically from New South Wales. And the great advantage of the state, of course, is you have authority over all the water, all the natural resources within that area. We will have authority over all of it. So when the Riverina State forms and we have all that water under our authority, I can assure you the use of water will be much, much different to what it is now. There'll be a lot more water available, absolutely. And people might think, oh, it's only a bit of water. Water out here is extremely important, I can assure you. So it'll be a huge thing. And then you've got the timber industry as well. The native timber industry is being shut down in New South Wales as well, just bit by bit, step by step. And for example, you may not know that in Victoria, the Daniel Andrews government put a prohibition on all native timber harvesting in Victoria. You cannot harvest native timber. Now, I better be careful here. I certainly know on Crown land you can't, but I believe it's on private land as well. But there's a prohibition on native timber harvesting. Now, that will happen in New South Wales as well. Yeah. So there's that as well, and it will just go on and on and on. And if you drive through any of the towns in the Riverina, you can drive through my town, Walcool, Moolameen, Deniliquin, Hay, Finley, Berrigan. These are the towns in this area. You can see that there's a deterioration in all of these towns. They're all around about 10% of the shop fronts are empty on every single town. And Hay, for example, had a population, this is only a smallish town, but Hay had a population of about 3,500. Now they're down to 2,000 people over the last 10 years.
David, we see the same thing up here. You wander into towns like Innisfail, Mareeba, Dimbula, all heavily populated regional centres, now just vacant shop front after vacant shop front, and conglomerates have moved in, gobbled up the baker, the florist, the cake shop, the sushi shop. They're all gobbled into these big shopping centres. So we see the same thing in all the regions up here, and it is in quite a sad state, and it's reflective across Australia, this centralisation of people and of power as well. And regions need to have they need to have this support and decisions made. I mean, we've watched over the years the declining of manufacturing in Australia to importation. Now, all these barriers to farming are only going to do one thing to our growing our own crops and vegetables and produce in Australia, it's going to dry it up. I mean, how many orchards have we heard that have been ploughed down? How many dairy farms are closed? You know, all these things are happening on our doorstep and on our watch. And this is on the basis of, of stupid city-made decisions that don't understand the regions and, the hardships and the tough times that these regions are facing. So I think tonight you've really enlightened us into, just exactly, the similarities, I guess, between the regions of North Australia and the Riverina are facing, and how true and how effective, how much of an effect it's having on the local populace down there. So it's certainly very interesting to hear that. Can I ask you a question now, if I may? How did COVID affect you down there near the border? Was it a big issue between the two borders, between New South Wales and Victoria for you guys?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, well, New South Wales closed the New South Wales border with Victoria. And that's created a massive disruption, absolutely massive, in that, for example, like myself, my business is in Victoria. Like most of my clientele are in New South Wales, but the wool sales are in Melbourne. Yep. And to drive, I have to go backward and forward to Melbourne normally, but because New South Wales put the border closure. Close the border with Victoria, you could go into Victoria all right, but you couldn't come back. Or if you did, I would have to self-isolate for 2 weeks and do all sorts of things, and I simply can't do that. I mean, you'll go broke. You just can't do that. And then you had a lot of there's a lot of cross-border activity between New South Wales and Victoria. I mean, you've got all the border towns. You've got the bigger ones like Gorbury, Wodonga, but all along the Murray River, every town, you've got one town on the New South Wales side, and just over the river you've got another town in Victoria. Cobram, Baruga, Yarrawonga, Mulwala, a local one is Barramkundruk, and all of a sudden you can't travel, well, you can travel into Victoria, but you're not allowed to come back into New South Wales, and the Victorians were prohibited from coming into New South Wales. So it caused a massive disruption, for sure, absolutely. The COVID-19, the cases and so forth, there's no cases here. There's not even a case, let alone a death. But the prohibition, massive disruption, for sure. It has been eased because practically they had to, because you simply can't. You can't stop people from doing it. Well, if they wanted to stop it, well, people would just find a way to go across, because you absolutely have to. You just have to. So anyway, so it was the lockdown was a huge disruption. It still is, actually.
Yeah, fair enough. Well,
but anyway, we have our premier.
Sorry, continue, David.
Oh, we have so I know our Premier Gladys Berejiklian, and it's a funny thing in this area of the state, most of the people don't even know who the New South Wales Premier is. We all know who the Victorian one is, but as I said, we're much closer to Victoria culturally than New South Wales. But I did hear that Gladys was going crook that Queensland's closed the Queensland borders to New South Wales. And but at the same time, she's not telling anybody that she's closed the New South Wales border to Victoria. So I thought, well, that's a bit of a double standard there, Gladys.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, funny. We, I must say, up our end of the world, David, we get a lot of tourists up from down south there, and there's a lot of actual Victorians who got out. And they're caravanning around the great state of Queensland, and they've got Victorian number plates. They're getting honked at, waved at, and told to go home. And, there's been quite a lot of banter with all the Victorians. And one of my friends has dropped the V off Victorians and called them Sictorians, put an S on there. And so there's been a lot of banter up this end of the world in relation to Victoria, and a lot of good people down there doing the right thing, and unfortunately they're just been a victim to it as much as the rest of the country has been, and people that aren't doing the right thing have put us all in this predicament, whereas, and some unknowingly, of course. So, but
just on that, Patrick, I'd just like to add a bit there, Patrick.
Sure.
A very important thing. Just the first thing, of course, in the winter, a lot of people from the south do go up to Queensland because it's just so much warmer, and that's naturally what they do. And I don't blame them either, particularly the older people. But because southern New South Wales and northern Victoria are actually very closely related in all sorts of ways, there is some talk and effort for northern Victoria, the irrigation areas of northern Victoria, to actually join in with the Riverina and separate from Victoria. Now, that might sound huge, and it is huge, but it's logical. Now, there's a member of the Victorian Parliament, Tim Quilty. He's an Upper House member, and he is a great new state advocate, and he is publicly advocating for Northern Victoria and Southern New South Wales, which is and being the whole irrigation areas of both states, to actually come together, and it's actually very, very logical. So
wow,
there's some interest in Victoria actually to actually join it into the Riverina. So it's entirely logical, because the Victorians are being shafted, and shafted is the word. The Victorian irrigators are being shafted just as badly as we are by the Victorian government, because Victoria's got the same problem that New South Wales has got, and the same problem that Queensland's got. You've got this huge concentration of electorates in the metropolitan area of Victoria, and an increasing concentration and an increasing majority of parliamentary representation, and they are being shafted exactly the same. And Patrick, you mentioned dairy farms there before. Now, there used to be a huge number of dairy farms in the Goulburn Valley, which is the Goulburn River and along the southern border of the Murray River. Now, the dairy industry in Victoria has been absolutely devastated, decimated, terrible, absolutely, and it's because now there's plenty of water. There's absolutely plenty of water in Victoria. The Murray River has been 2/3 full for all the time. There's a massive amount of water going down the Murray River, but the Victorian government won't allow their farmers to have it either. So they've got the same problem that we've got, and sounds like the same problem you've got. Yeah. So Victorians, they're nice. The ones they're all nice people, but the ones in northern Victoria are very, very similar to us. They're very agriculturally orientated. And they've got exactly the same problem. So there is some interest in actually northern Victoria separating from Victoria. And I know that's pretty radical, but
well, David, you're just breaking up there a little bit. I don't know if you can hear me.
Member of the Victorian Parliament advocating for it. So
you mentioned that, so. Now, look, David, it's been fascinating chatting with you tonight, mate, and I think you mentioned that you did drop out when you mentioned his name. That's Tim Quilty, the MP who's
Tim Quilty.
That's it?
Yeah, Tim Quilty.
Yep. Yeah. So that broke up when you were saying his surname before.
Yeah, he was on your podcast there last week, I think.
That's correct, yeah. Well, look, David, mate, it's been absolutely fascinating listening and chatting with you this evening on the podcast tonight. We have run out of time. We've got to wrap up this hour-long program, and we're going over. But, mate, can I say thank you very much for your time? Right. And, and thank you to all listeners who've joined us tonight as well. And, I'm sure you, would also like me to extend our gratitude to David for his time and insightfulness and, all of his, wisdom tonight on this, podcast. So, David, thank you again. And, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. And Bill, you've been quiet in the background there. You still there, Bill?
Yeah, I can't get a word in, but yes, I'd like to say thank David for coming along, and I'm sure in the coming weeks after the Queensland election's been and gone, we'll get yourself and Tim on to our Northern Vibe Zoomcast, and I hope I can get Jim Belshaw, who's the last surviving member of the New England movement, on the same show.
Wow.
So you can all get together having a bit of talk, because there's quite a lot of other interesting things to talk about. Like there was New South Wales that was actually fairly progressive in the 1920s and 30s, and did look at creating separate states out of its territories. It had the Cohen Commission in the 20s, which recognised 3 additional areas of New South Wales that were suitable for separation, and that was the New England, the Riverina, and Eden Monaro as 3 additional states. Now, that commission came up with those recommendations, and what followed on from that was the Nicholas Commission in the early 30s, which came out, and what its job was is to determine what the criteria were for a separate state and making borders. And they came out with a lot of recommendations in regards to, hey, don't use rivers as borders because you're dividing communities, you know.
Yeah, well, exactly right.
And they came out with a lot of other, I think there was about 7 major recommendations. And they also came up with their boundary of for the New England in state, because that was the primary push. And I think one of the issues at that time is one of their criteria was your water source had to be protected. So they did sort of look at Newcastle a little bit in regards to, well, it gets its water fed out of the New England area, and that's why they sort of locked together. But we don't have those constraints these days. We have agreements between states and that to guarantee water supply and that. I mean, Queensland's not going to barrage the river off at its border to make nothing go down to New South Wales. We're a bit more civilised than that.
That's right.
They're the interesting things that can be discussed then, and I hope you and Tim can join Jim Belshaw on a show after the 31st of October on the election.
So we'll finish there. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, David.
Just remember.
Go on, David. Go, Dave.
Great to be on the show, Patrick. Fantastic.
No, thanks, David.
Oh, well, guys, you've got to remember in history, Queensland separated from New South Wales in, I think, 1854 or 1856, I think.
59.
That's right. 59.
59. I mean, Queensland was part of New South Wales, and so was Victoria. There is a precedent for that. They were colonies when they separated, but Queensland was certainly part of New South Wales. Absolutely. 1859 was it, Bill? I think, was it?
Yes. And now our forefathers were smart enough when they wrote the Constitution. They actually devoted a whole chapter to separation.
That's right. They provided for it.
Constitution. So they provide us with the means as we moved forward and developed that new areas could be created, new states could be created in areas.
That's right.
I don't know if they were having a go at us when they put the initiation of the process in the hands of the state parliament that you want to hive away from. Whereas before, when you were colonies, you bypassed the parliament, went straight to the governor, and sort of petitioned to Britain to separate. So it's a bit of a painful process now.
Yeah, but
gentlemen, with the enthusiasm we've got, I'm sure we are going to prevail at some stage. And you know, everyone who understands this and gets involved gets that enthusiasm. And you know, it's hard to quash. So,
Patrick, you dropped out.
And, last thing we need to mention tonight is the Northern Vibe will be on 6 p.m. Monday night, which is is it a Zoomcast back in the background there, Andrew?
Yes, Zoomcast, Pat.
Zoomcast.
That's right. Pat, you still there?
You pulled a plug. Oh, we can wind up.
We better finish it off, Bill.
Yeah.
You better finish it off, Bill.
Thanks for coming on tonight. We look forward to hearing from you and Tim soon. And like I say, I think it'll be a great Zoomcast if we can get Jim Belshaw in. But the only thing you've got to remember, he gets quite emotional about the whole affair. So it will be a great night. And again, thanks very much. And to everyone, a good night. And I hope you enjoyed the show and join us again next week. It will be we'll have another exciting episode for you.
Well done, everyone.
At the moment, we've made a request to Darren Darren Griffiths of the One Nation candidate for Cairns, and also Steve Andrews, the member for One Nation member for Morani, to come on. They're both tentatively agreed, and we're just waiting confirmation, so that should be a good show.
Okay, Pat.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you, David. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Andrew. Good night, everyone. Good night, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. All the best, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good.